You recall we were, last time, mentioning the fact that regardless of how it flies in the city, that from another more manifold view, you cannot separate thought from people, a person who thinks a thought, that there is actually no such animal as a thought. And I was giving that as a kind of suggested rule. But I would like to also point out that it's like blue light special alert, that up on the hillside, under revolutionary conditions, you could have an abridgment to such a rule. It might be possible, I was going to suggest, that if you had found your own new neural building site, that it might be possible to, in a quite real way, escape the limits of three-dimensional confines of what you would have to do to find an abridgment of time, matter, and energy. Because it would only be in some form of escape from that there could be such a thing as actual information apart from some kind of retrieval instrument. That is, it would only be possible, which I would have to also suggest it should be called something else then, but it would be possible for there to be actual thoughts, ideas, information, in some way actually having a life of its own. That is, actually existing. Of course, my tongue, under the atmosphere and auspices of three-dimensional gravity, wants to say certain place, certain time, which again would be past that. But it would be what would be comparable to there being a thought, an idea that in some way is somewhere. Just there it is. And it can exist apart from someone to think it. I didn't get you confused already. Back in the city, I still suggested it as an operational rule, although it's unregistered in the city. And that is, there is no such thing, although life operates through man on the basis otherwise, and it serves a function. But under any ordinary conditions, just look around. The mind is not wired up to think about it that way, but it takes. If it was asked directly, it would say that yes, certain things like the truth. Or if you were still an ordinary person and you believed in some religion, just sense of morality, and you say, well, decency, honesty, that there is such a thing as honesty, without particularly any religious connotations, you might say. But you would say there is such a thing as honesty. Where is it? And again, if I was so foolish, I might get some ordinary intelligence somewhere to go, oh, I see what you mean. Well, there's no such thing as honesty. You can't go over it. It's not like a cement block. And then what would happen? Ordinary intelligence would go, and that'd be the end of it. Because it is wired up in such a way, it's not a mistake, it is not folly, but his life is wired in such a way, and I'm including now what we've been talking about the last few nights, me referring back to institutions. Culture is bricks in the city, but the institutions are not limited to those things that might have an actual mortar structure, such as churches, colleges, army barracks. In the inside of what I'm referring to as institutionals in the city, they are instrumentalities that do not have to have buildings, such as honesty. That is an institution. Goodness is an institution. It is all verbal constructs that life has wired men up to believe without any analyzation. It will not hold up, of course, as I said, because I could get even an ordinary person to say, well, all right, you're right. Honesty does not exist in the same way that this podium does. And then it would go. But it is, ordinary intelligence is wired up in such a way that it must operate on that basis that honesty is a something. Even if it said, all right, I know it is not some material structure like this. But notice, if you're just trying to follow this, even at some parallel, some oblique angle, to not just take this literally, your own nervous system still wants to say, well, wait a minute, honesty is something. It's an ideal, it's some kind of reality. It may be non-material, but my God, it's a reality. Even if it is a reality, it cannot exist. It does not exist in any operational sense if you get above the level of the buildings, the institutions in the city. If you get above that level, there is no reality to any institution, any idea such as honesty, outside of somebody to be honest. There is no such thing as a thought floating around. And everything at the ordinary level at which the intellect is wired and primed is based otherwise. It just does not go about analyzing it this way, and it's not wired up to deal with this kind of debate if indeed it was worthy of a debate. But it is simply an accepted, it is a given that things exist, things that you cannot see. Not just spirits and fairies and trolls, but ideas, ideals, morals, such as honesty, goodness, non-goodness. If you get above the tops of the buildings in the city, if you can get above this kind of level in your own nervous system, inside of your own brain, you have got to recognize there is no such thing as the church, there is no such thing as Princeton, there is no such thing as honesty outside of somebody to be a Catholic, a Methodist, a Jew, a graduate of Harvard, a student at Princeton, someone to be honest, someone to be perhaps honest, someone to be dishonest. Now, back to where I started, I was going to suggest that there might be the possibility of an abridgment to this rule. That if you do get above the city, that is, if you can begin to think somewhere inside your own nervous system that is not based upon the ordinary institutions, not just religiously, not just nationalistically, but the whole building site where your operations take place now in the intellect, if you get to a new place, I am suggesting that it might be possible to abridge this. That is, this might be the place that people do ordinarily assume happens anyway, that what seems to be thought, information, might exist apart from the one thinking it. As an aside again, if you'd like to note, the reality of this is the basis, I would suggest to you most strongly, of the mystical, the more mystical sides of all city religions. Taken at a more crude level, to slow it down, it is the basis of all religions in one sense. It's not the basis, but one of the basis of religion is, in the city you have got to believe that there is something apart from man, because man is flawed by all religions. All religious views is in some way flawed. And so his non-flawedness, that is, his potential to be better, in some way has got to exist outside of him, right? Well, that's true in the 3D world, or else you would have an automobile that is misfiring, and the automobile could cure itself. There has to be something outside of it. There has to be something, when you have a piece of equipment, when you have an idea that in the three-dimensional world is flawed, broken, misfiring, malfunctioning, then that which is going to have a remedial effect on it has got to be outside the car. You cannot walk up, even though you might be Oral Roberts III, and lay your hands on the hood of a Dodge and say, "Be healed." Something from outside the hood of that Dodge has got to get in there and heal it. Did anybody follow me with that? The basis of religion, one of the bases, is that there is the reality of stuff, things, ideas, nouns, verbs, spirits, matter, in some way outside the people who talk about it, who think about it. Well, obviously the guides, for those that still believe in that, but also the possibility that man could be better. If he can be better, and the potential is in him right now, well, hell, he would be better. But the potential to be better in some way, it's kind of vague, but it's floating around out here. It may be over in this synagogue, or it may be in that priest's brain. It may be in the hidden archives of the Orthodox Church in Greece. It may be hidden in a secret book somewhere. But without any analyzation, is simply the accepted, the operational acceptance that thoughts, let's just lump them all in thoughts, that thoughts can exist outside of a person to think them. And in the city, that operates. In the city, that flies. You get above the city, and it does not fly. You can see, well, it's not true, no matter what the thought is. If the thought is, I hate salami, it takes a person to have that thought. If the thought is, I would give my life for charitable causes, same thing. There has to be somebody to think it. There is no reality to any thought outside of a thinker. The abridgment that I suggest is possible for a reason would be if you're in a new place thinking. Not a new place in the city, of course, but a new place here. That is the intrigue, if you didn't know, catch why I brought it up. That is the captious intrigue in religion, in ideas of mystical systems or metaphysics and hidden gurus and caves and secret books and all that, is that there is something lacking in me, this person might say, many people throughout history. And the lack actually exists. This missing piece in me, this little piece, could be fulfilled, I just know it could, and the piece actually exists. Not physically, but the piece, this piece of information, the question I want answered. You know, like, where is God, or how much longer are we going to have to put up with one shoe at a time in the road? They're important questions that the answers actually exist somewhere, and that answer would be, and I'd be complete. Then I'd go, aha! Then I would be satisfied. I could go on about my business. At city level, under ordinary conditions, there is no information, there are no ideas, there are no thoughts without a thinker. They cannot be apart from it. The idea, the unrecognized belief that that is possible is what drives, in many ways, religion, people's ideas of some esoteric knowledge. And I am trying to suggest to you that if you can begin to think outside the limits of your own city limits and the intellect, then the kind of new information you pick up, in a sense, is freed from somebody to think it. And if that sounds too weird, it gets closer to what ordinary people again would want to call objective knowledge. That is, I see things and it's true, and it's not true because I see it. It's just true. Of course, at that level, true and all this is beside the board, but there are no words for it. You simply see and go, But it is not on the basis of you see it and go, I knew I was right. You don't see it on the basis that in any way you have a vested interest in it other than, instead of hiding out perhaps, metaphorically speaking, in the bathroom with a playboy or playgirl, you can tickle your nervous system up here in a very special way. But it is no longer limited to energy or matter. That's the reason I used that earlier. It is not limited to any known definitions, connotations, or limitations. You simply see something. It is as close as possible to describe. It would be the possible abridgment to my city rule that which you see, that which you think, it's not perfect description, but comparably speaking, that which you now see is free from a seer. That which you think is free from a thinker. It is what people dream of as some kind of great cosmic insight, the kind that for so long you have read about in the ads in the back of Popular Mechanics and other challenging magazines. That sort of thing. How about a little aside? What if I ask you this? Consider this. What might be the possible effect, even the ramifications, on the operations of city intelligence and thought, if suddenly a mathematical formula was revealed that answered and explained all of man's questions about himself? A mathematical formula. You understand that take all religion, sociology, psychology, anthropology, and just blew it away. Everything that man has always questioned about himself. That if, just follow me, this is possible, that suddenly somebody sprung up somewhere and gave this mathematical formula, and it was in such a sequential, logical, three-dimensionally based city context that anybody who thought it all looked at it and went, that everything is explained, but in a mathematical formula. What might be the possible effects, if such a thing could happen, on city thought? And of course, for those of you that like to live dangerously, forget all about the city and my diagrams and stuff out there. What if in here, all of these great questions, the intriguing, the strange, the shadowy corners, considering all that lurks within the soul, the spirit of man, and all the possible ways to look at it, and all the notes you've made throughout the years, and all the books you've read, and listening to this kind of stuff, and suddenly it was presented to you a formula that you understood. It wasn't just a short one, maybe a little more complex than 2 + 2 = 4, but the formula, somebody says, this is going to explain all, and that's all the question you have, and sure enough, it came to you, and you went, what might be its long-term or short-term, for real danger, effect on your own thinking? Might I also point out that this would be tied to, in a certain way, still this kind of hillside revolutionist kind of need, wherein to move your neural building site is not based upon the requirement of further education or training or facts. Is what you really need is outside the city, that is, a new building site in your own nervous system, a place wherein you could anew intellectually gather askewed views and process fresh data. You don't see any connection between that and the possibility there could be information somewhere, but not under ordinary conditions, that would not be limited to somebody to think the information. And of course, I assume you don't see any possible connection between that and the rhetorical question, what if there was a mathematical formula that answered everything? No, I don't see any connection whatsoever. Well, I thought I'd ask. Doesn't hurt to ask. No. Of course, unless you ask a person that's real big and irritated, who doesn't like people sticking their nose into his business. But other than that, it doesn't hurt to ask. How about something else that we were mentioning last time we were taping, about the fact that all things, institutions, groups of people, perhaps individual people themselves, but for a thing to have strength, it cannot be, in the three-dimensional sense, pure for it to have real strength. There's got to be an alloy that was inside the group, inside the structure of the organization, the institution, the person. There must be factions. Still in regard to that which is a city rule. If a thing, group, person, institution, movement, idea, if a thing does have strength, does have viability, it will have factions. If it has factions, it will have dimensions. And if it has dimensions, it will have a landscape. As opposed to the fact, if indeed you could find the real great, dreaded, absolutely fanatical group of people somewhere, that internally there were no factions, they were all in agreement, it would have no landscape. It would be a featureless, almost boringly endless, flat kind of horizon. No landscape. If a thing is alive, an idea, a movement, a person, an institution, then it has an internal landscape, and from a not all that weird view, if you can see it, even externally looking at the operations of the thing, it has a landscape. But there in the middle of what I said, if it has factions, it has dimensions. As they're called in our world, no need to try and gussy them up. It has height, breadth, and depth. Anything that's alive has this. And although I think we've hit on this in passing once or twice, you can look upon the dimensions of life, just of us being here, with the camera, the podium, you, me, having height, breadth, and depth, and we seem to move about in space and take up a certain kind of exclusive area at any given time, and we can bump against one another, and etc. But inside of each so-called individual city, the podium, me, you, the limits of your dimensions, inside those dimensions you can see the dimensions themselves are factions. It is at this level, it is the eternal natural struggle. You can forget about good and evil and all that. The struggle for those in the know, and I'm sure all of you people want to be in the know, the struggle is not between Marxism and capitalism, socialism and free marketism. It is not between Easternism and Westernism, first world countries and second world countries. It is not even against Baptists and Southern Baptists. And it's certainly not against good and evil. Oh, I know all that goes on, but that's the kind of stuff they show on television and put in popular distributed periodicals for the masses to read. If you're going to be in the know, the struggle is amongst height, breadth, and depth. It always has been, and it still is. But you've got to realize that without this struggle, in the 3D world, the molecular structures would lack the stress, the internal stress, to survive. The struggle is never for those in the know. The struggle is never on the basis of morality. The struggle is a matter of engineering. But it seems in the city, for me to be mildly attempted entertaining for a second to distract you. In the city, apparently, if I was going to make up another new creation myth somewhere along the line, how about this, that the forces that created it all at first had men understand that, hey, there's a great struggle going on. But he didn't mention anything, the forces didn't mention anything about serpents trying to tempt your trees that would give you dangerous information, or that there are fruits you could eat, or women or spirits that you might lay with that would give you a threatening sense of hubris. What if originally they said, what if originally these forces, as soon as they made all of our little progenitors, it said, hey, you might like to look around. What holds all this garden together, what holds the universe together is not good and evil and right and wrong and turtles on the back of other turtles and Shiva and Nassau and everybody else. They said, what's holding it all together? If you look around, you notice that everything seems to have stuff you can hold on to, like, it actually exists. And they all went, yeah. And so, all right, if you notice, it has a height, and yeah, and it has a depth, yeah, and it has a breadth, yeah. All right, what's holding it together is those things are fighting each other all the time. And that's what keeps everything kind of tense. If they ever stop pulling at each other, things die. Trees, people. And I could suggest that our forefathers and foremothers thought, boy, that sure is a bland story. I'm just shooting in the dark. And maybe the forces went off and realized, maybe they tried to even scare people and say, hey, by the way, we helped make you, and every now and then we'd like for you to, say hi or send us, write to us if you get work, or build some kind of temple, do something. And maybe the people, of course, I guess we'd have to also consider the progenitor somewhere back there of even the Simpsons. And so the forces might have said something like, we should pay homage to us sometime, and somebody might have said, eat my what. And so the forces might have went, wait a minute, we're going to have some threat of punishment here. All right, heart down there, listen up. If you people, if you don't do what we said, I'm going to sick height on you. And again, I suggest, just making this up as I go along, that Adam and Eve and all the little Evettes, they might have went away and thought, boy, what a phony baloney threat. So then they might even try to, wait a minute, that was just the first threat. If you go past that stage and really pee us off, I'll sick, hate to say it, depth on you. At any rate, to make a short story shorter. That's one possibility that the forces realized, well, this is not going to keep people in line. So then it came out with these things, instead of calling it breadth and stuff, they conjured up things with horns and burning forever, or being tortured to death, and being forced to listen to Jerry Vale records. Don't write me from his fan club again, please don't. I sent my dues in. But I'm back to telling you that this is as fair and equitable a verbal description as you can come up with until you get to a place in your own building site where you don't need a description. But the forces, the tensile strength holding together all bridges, all city structures, your own nervous system, is a struggle not between good and evil. It is a struggle, a natural struggle, an unavoidable struggle between height, breadth, and depth. This is felt as a kind of conflict. But people do not call it that. People think the conflict is between all sorts of things. It's back to my great cosmic Punch and Judy show, that they feel in themselves, well, it's a conflict between my good side and my bad side, my conscious mind, my unconscious mind. That which I want to do, which is fairly uncivil, and then the fear of being caught. Then on a larger scale, out here in the institutional side of life, it's again, obviously, a struggle of great dualities of some kind. The struggle is to stay alive. The struggle is that which produces the inner and the outer landscape, and it seems to be a conflict, but it is the same kind of conflict that is necessary to keep a bridge up when you drive over it. No one to be foolish enough. I'm going to be foolish enough to say the example right quick. Those of you who hadn't already figured it out. Who would be foolish enough driving across the Golden Gate Bridge or the Oakland Bridge and drive over and stop suddenly, look out there and think, and speak to the molecular structure of the bridge and holler, why don't you guys knock it off? If indeed they knocked it off, you do understand that you should hope that your automobile or you can suddenly grow fins, be a submarine, because the bridge would collapse if that tension was gone. Another aside to an aside, I guess. Might you also consider this, that up on the hillside in this kind of metaphorical, if not real, revolutionist camp, if you could find a new building site, I would suggest again a possible abridgment to this, because there would not be that kind of internal faction, as we already mentioned last time we were taping, but there would not be a natural struggle going on. Because if you can find a new place in which to build your own intellect, it's got no natural enemies. I might suggest throughout all religious history there's been these stories about heaven, or some new place would be where, I believe the biblical one is that sheep and lions would lie down together, which is a form of saying that height and breadth would quit fighting each other. But what they're just trying to describe is a place wherein creatures, things, thoughts, information would have no natural enemies, which indeed is going to come out as being some never land or an after-world land, because the ordinary intelligence cannot find it here, because if it found it here, it'd be deadly. If it found it here, if you wanted to find a place where, in the true metaphorical sense, sheep and lions, natural enemies, good and evil, civility and ferility, would actually coexist, what you've got, again, is a bridge that's going to collapse. Or you're inside of a building, and the molecular structure falls apart internally. That's why it must be dreamed of somewhere else, because if it happened here, which life's not going to let happen here except on small levels, that's a form of death, it's not going to happen on a large level, and so people dream, well, after I die, or the spirits in some way will bless us, and we'll go to a place where there are no conflicts. Well, like Noah, the nervous system is saying, we'll go to a place that is the eternal Death Valley, a featureless landscape, a place where there is no tension. That is, a place where there is no life. But it has to be somewhere else. It cannot be here. My suggestion was that a possible abridgment, which you would have to have whole new terminology if you wanted to talk about it, but I've got to go ahead with what we've got, that if you were thinking in a new place, if you were thinking there, you would have the biblical, if not Rousseau's old idea, or the paintings of the natural jungle, and all the creatures are smiling at each other, that no one in the painting, no one in the dream has a natural enemy. That would only be here. And that would be tied to what I suggested to you. You consider the possibility that a thought could exist, information could exist without an instrumentality. A thought could exist without a thinker, because if you've got a thought and a thinker, you've got a conflict. Well, you should know that. If not, just go back and revisit the Inquisition is a great one. All right? Go back and visit your own nervous system. That is, everybody's thoughts about everything is slightly what? Well, let's be decent. Biased? Well, I wouldn't call it bias. It's just my view, and my view's right. In fact, my twin brother will agree with me. And the twin brother says, almost entirely. Well, I thought you agreed with me. Well, I do, but I'm not you exactly, but yeah, I agree. I'll go down fighting with you. The point is, there is no piece of information anywhere that by city terminology is indeed objective. That is, that floats free of the people who think it. So it has natural enemies. Internally, it's got its own natural enemies. Because any thought you got, you had it. And you can say, well, I got the greatest thought in the world. This thing almost explains everything. And your best friend, he may be out there, he might be in your own nervous system, says, yeah, but how about so-and-so? And your feeling is, why don't you shut up? Who asked you? You have got a conflict, but there's nothing wrong with it. It is a natural conflict. It makes the intellect at city level breathe. But in a sense, there is a natural competitiveness. There is all thoughts have their own natural prey, their own enemy. But I think as Pogo, the philosophical possum, says, you don't have to go looking. The prey is you. Wait a minute. I'll think about that. You don't have to, sir. You have just been consumed. or at least severely mauled. You need tetanus shots. I think I see what you mean. No, you don't. No. You just bit yourself again. A slight running with this. Not on a rugby field, no. But a slight running with this. You can also look at it this way. That in the city, under ordinary conditions, all secondary activity needs an audience. Nay. Can you say nay on cable? Nay. Secondary activities and those involved, which includes everyone, secondary activities not only need an audience, the need of the performer is to wow the audience, to win over the audience, to convince the audience, to convert the audience. Yes, that's better. Would you also consider that internally we could define an audience as equaling factions? There has to be. It's obvious. If I was an entertainer and you were the audience, and I'm up here to sing and dance or to do a recitation, there is factions involved. You're one faction and I'm the other. Or else there would be no performance. So there must be an audience. All performances, you can change the description if you want to, but all performances are a form of competition. To do anything secondarily, not only you need an audience, you need to win. These are not the terms necessarily used. Sometimes they are. But you are attempting, of course the obvious, the crudest showbiz sense, you are attempting to win over the audience. You come out and they announce, here he is, one of the right up-and-coming comedians, and you never heard of him. He comes out. He has got to win you over. He not only needs an audience, you can't stay at home and be a famous person. You can't stay at home and be a comedian. If you're going to be a comedian, you need an audience. But remember, not just need an audience, which is true across the board, but But you actually need to win them over. It is a competition. There can be no competition without factions. There can be no landscape internally. There can be no secondary activity without what appears to be a competition. Now, forget for a second a comedian, an entertainer, and an audience. How about internally? Everything that you present is a competition. Everything that you apparently present. Everything that seems to be a new idea presented to you, that you ponder, that you take in, that you walk up on your own stage, as it were, and you hold it up. You hold up this idea, and your audience goes, I've heard that before. That's an old joke. No, this is a different punchline. Oh, I see you changed the words, but I heard that joke years ago. I know that idea. It's not enough to have an audience. You've got to have an audience, or it's not going to operate. In the same way, you've got to have factions within anything, within an operation, within an idea, within an institution, or it is not alive. You must have the struggles between the dimensions, but there is continually, and it's chopped up, is what episodic life is about, is what episodic consciousness is about. There is apparently a continuing little segments of, an ephemeral finality. That is, you come out and like you're one comedian and you do your bit and the audience after a few seconds or a few moments goes, and so you leave. Like, well, they won. Then you come back, all right, wait a minute. Maybe you put on a funny nose and glasses and you come back and you announce yourself as another comedian and you think, well, these people, what they like is dirty philosophy. I'll have to get into my blue material. And so you give it to them and they all go, ha, 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 and so then you win. But it apparently is cut up into this episodic, the runnings of your internal sitcom. And it goes on one little segment after another. And so there is the appearance, of course you do not necessarily use these terms, but there is the appearance of continually someone winning. Like sometimes here you are on stage at the Apollo, the Ted Mack Amateur Hour for those of you old enough, and you do your bit and you get the gong, or the gong show. You get the gong. All right, so you lost. Then you come out and you do another bit. And then the crowd goes, hey. So apparently you lost one, then you won one. Then you lost one, then you won one. Then you lost 4 or 5. Then you got drunk. Then you hit drunk. There has to be not only the factions, there has to be the natural struggle between the dimensions. There has to be another, these are all just, you might say, different descriptions. I guess some would figure it out. Different views of more or less the same thing. But there has to be an audience. This is still based upon, in case you think we lost our way, think for yourself, that the ordinary intellect is wired up in such a way to believe that thoughts exist apart from a person, can exist. That is still based upon everything you think. The greatest idea you ever heard, the most inspiring book, the most enlightening thing you've ever read, you sit there and read it. It's part of the jokes I have Kairoot do all the time about people saying they don't talk to themselves. Anybody that says they don't talk to themselves, who told them that? Any thought you have, let's say you read a thought and it's attributed to, Descartes, Buddha, and you read the thought and you're such a legitimate, honest person that you would never attempt to plagiarize such a person and pass this off. You give credit where credit is due, and it says, the middle way, the way of moderation is the way of enlightenment, signed, Bobby Buddha, or whatever his name. And you go, that is the missing link. That's the piece of information that I have been short all this time. But you understand, you're talking to yourself. Literally. Now you say, wait a minute, the book's talking to me. Now, of course, that's metaphorical, you might say, because it's actually Buddha. Now, I guess, now you know he's dead. All right, what's talking to me, you might say, what's talking to me is the truth of that information. Oh, the thought itself is talking to you. Yes, that's what I mean. So you weren't listening when we started the tape. Oh, I forgot, I made you up. Well, he wasn't listening anyway. But you didn't follow? The information wasn't talking to you. Buddha wasn't talking to you. Moses, Muhammad, John Locke, Bertrand Russell, Noel Coward. They don't talk to you. You may read it, Or you may hear somebody talk. You may hear somebody say something to you. You might hear me say something, and you go, oh, hey. And you write it down, or inside you repeat it again. You kind of chew on it. God, boy, is that nourishing. Boy, is that potentially helpful. You're taking it as though, like I threw out. Let's say I did it. Did you think it came from me? It's like I threw out a little slice of pizza, and you, oh, I like that. I remember that. You think I threw it out, but what are you eating? You're not eating me throwing it out. You're not chewing on me. The pizza does not eat itself. If I just throw it, it doesn't stand there in midair. If it did, you would never think the pizza, right? All right, eat the pizza. Don't you see? So it is based upon internally, and people do not analyze it this way. If you tell people, hey, everybody talks to themselves, many people, probably a safe bet that the majority of people in any situation would say, that's not true. I got an aunt that wanders around talking to herself, but hell, she hadn't been laid in 40 years. Or an uncle. Don't all you aunts write me. Well, better you than all the uncles. I'd rather hear from you. People would say, I do not talk to myself. I know what you mean. I know somebody talks to themselves. Because they cannot see that the nervous system, and not only the nervous system, the church, Harvard, all ideas, communism, democracy, free market economics, meteorology, everything is talking to itself. That is, everything is divided into an audience and a performer. Anything you think is based upon a faction. You thought it. You may have read it or heard, well, there it is. I read this thought, and I'm thinking about it. It is an audience and it is a performer. In this case, if you look at what you read, the quote from Buddha as being the performer won. In that little instance, Jesus, that is something. I'm going to remember that. But it's on the basis that you think that exists apart from you. Now, without people analyzing this, could we try and move a little further? It being an unrecognized competition between an audience and the performer, is you also have this. You have the unrecognized attempt when you're trying to win over. Whether you were on stage making a speech at some local meeting, the PTA, and you're trying to win the crowd over to like you, to agree to your suggestion to change the curriculum at the school or something, or whether you were actually in showbiz, whether you're actually trying to convert some people to a political belief, whatever it is, what you're trying to do, without understanding it, is you are trying to merge you and the audience. You are trying to heal the fracture. You are trying to coagulate the inner factions. You are trying to fuse Punch and Judy. And it can't be allowed. So that's why I have been so irritated all these years. Who said that? You mean why you've been so motivated to stay alive? Well, I guess you put it that way. That doesn't hold out a lot of promise for the city institutions, does it? No, don't worry about that. Don't you worry about a thing. It'll be all right. It will. If it's not absolutely mandatory to survive, at least it's entertaining. If you could heal the factions within anything, if you could take Judaism, Catholicism, ideas of democracy, MIT, if you took any institution, I'm trying to make it good and crude and big and fat to start with, any group over here, the country of Lebanon, and you said, look, all you people, all you Christians, all you Jews are still left here, all of you Shiites and you Sunni Muslims, plus all you people who are just running around here and don't believe in anything. Calm down, all you people. Come to your senses. This used to be a beautiful country. You come over here and gamble and get laid. It was a nice place. For you people not old enough to remember Beirut. And look what you people have done. You just run the neighborhood. Why don't you sit down and either work out your differences or at least listen to me? And let me point out to you the differences you've got ain't worth spit. That's, for you people who don't know, that's South Carolina diplomatic talk. But the differences you people are fighting over is not worth anything. Come to your senses. And suddenly I went, Jesus, he's right. Maybe they wouldn't all say Jesus, but they'd say, he's right. Let's assume they all came to their senses. Lebanon, if you think, according to the news, what you see, if you think Beirut looks tacky and beat up now, you've never seen a whole country just collapse like a bridge, because if they would all come to their senses and listen to you, and you could merge the performers and the audience, you could merge the factions, you could heal the fractures, the son of a bitch would die. It would literally collapse. You wouldn't have to worry about a society, as they like to say, the society, the civilization of Lebanon. You don't have to worry about this thing slowly destroying itself. You'll never hear it on the news again, because you can extract the adjective slowly, or the adverb slowly. It would happen el pronto. And yet, is that not, from a certain view, some of you I can tell are being able to follow this, is that not what life seems to be about, especially in religion? But then when you get into what would seem to be non-religious, just ideas of living life more coherently, more profitably, more sociably, is you are constantly, you and everyone else, from large operations that would seem to be institutionalized down to individual levels, two people, dance teams, interpersonal relations inside of you, you are attempting to engage in some sort of healing process, that you're attempting to bring together factions. You're attempting, just in a relationship with another person, you're attempting, it seems like, to make the relationship better, for us to even have more fun, to enjoy our times together more than we do. And we're to sit down, I can't stand the way you talk so much, or you're always out shopping, or you're always out cutting the grass, or wanting to go out with the guys. We got these differences, and what you're saying is you want to take Punch and Judy. You want to take the audience and the performer, and you want to take them like this and go, to heal all separation, to take the footlights, the edge of the stage between the performer and the audience, and obliterate it. And here, people don't understand. That's why they think they're seeking the truth in the city, or that they're seeking some kind of cosmic revelations, hidden knowledge somewhere. Because what they're saying is they want to take the audience and the performer in them, that is, talking to themselves. What seems to be the possibility of information or thoughts floating free from somebody to think it, and to take it on somehow go, ah! Like a good little kid being able to take a peanut butter and jelly sandwich and mash it so much that even the Planck Institute could not ever actually separate the peanut butter from the jelly anymore. You just go, ah! That is what people believe would be the final payoff of a life well spent, of a religious life, of a good humane life, or of knowing something secret. What they're saying is that the separation between the audience and performer, but internally they don't recognize it, the difference between me thinking stuff and the things I think, that in some way they would merge. But at city level it can't happen. It would be deadly. That's why I'm telling you the possibility. It's like a bleed through on a tape. The information just kind of bleeds out into the general consciousness, the general wiring system of humanity, and they keep dreaming of it. But it doesn't happen, and so therefore the dreams end up in Never Never Lands. It ends up in the hands of gods. It ends up in other lives somewhere. When what they're actually dreaming about is the nervous system, the brain itself, inside of their own skull, being able to shift over somewhere else, to be able to think somewhere where it has no natural enemies, over somewhere where it has nobody to dance with, which you understand is unnatural, it's unnecessary. And most people are not wired up for that. But that's actually what they're after. Is I want a place where I could produce suddenly a brand new lamb, and it get over there and lay down with the lions. If you could produce a brand new lamb, that is, thought in a new place, it's not really that it could go over there and now lay down with lions. It is that over there are no lions. There is no difference over there in a new place of a performer and an audience. There are no factions. There is no tension to hold it together. And then people still wonder, well, some of this really interests me, and I think, boy, I'm on the track of something, and it feels like I have stuffed my whole jumpers and knickers full of smoke. And I get home and I think, what the hell was this about? There you are. It just has no natural enemies. It's got nobody to dance with. There is no natural internal tension to it. Oh, won't we just sum it up and say, I assume the Gershons will forgive me because I've forgiven them for all that. You can say, it ain't necessarily so. Or the variation, it ain't necessary. And a little sidetrack, we've got a few more minutes. You might notice, it's not to give anybody the blues, but everybody experiences some of this that continues it, plus you can learn something from it, useful. Because what I'm trying to tell you has no natural enemies. That's why it's not true. So. That's why it sounds so weird when you think, well, I heard it. But Jesus, that's too weird. How did I hear that? But it's like this. Is a new thought sight inside of your own brain, or if you want me to call it, a revolutionist camp outside the city, outside the holes of what the ordinary institutions of city life. And all of that which is supported and fed and nourished you all these years without you knowing it. Everybody was supposed to. The nourishment of you having faith in where you stand on your family, your hometown, your religion, your race, your nationality, your thoughts, your personality. Well, I may not have much, but at least I got me. Well, let's don't go into that. It just leads to sarcastic jokes, I know. Inside the revolutionist camp, inside of you trying to do something off on your own, that is thinking more than you actually have to. You got no natural audience inside. There is nobody to win over. When you start there, you got no peers, which is a normal audience, or general audience, and you certainly got no betters, you got no superiors. You're not out there doing a song and dance like, God, I got to win you over. Who you got to win over? I assume by now everybody's been through some touch of this, that when you first start, let us say, sort of hanging around inside neurally, and you kind of begin to think stuff out of the ordinary. Not just weird, nutty stuff before you did this, but stuff that actually has no natural enemies. And you try to tell somebody, your old best friend. All of you surely had time by now that your best friend, your soulmate, the guy or girl that for years you were able to talk to all night over coffee with a copy of Sartre in your back pocket and your shades on, and you go and try to tell them some of this, and they go, God almighty, what have you found to either smoke, chew, or in some other way put inside of your body? In other words, they find this to be beyond the pale of some kind of all-night metaphysical discussion. That you've got no peers in this. And it's not a qualitative judgment. It's not you're better, but there is no natural peerage to this. There is no natural audience to this, not only out there, which is just of no consequence, but in here there's not. It's why sometimes there's a feeling I know that people go through that don't get the blues, but it's like a feeling like I feel sort of alone in here. Not in here, but in here like, ooh. You know, what does this prove? What good is this going to do me? Well, none. I thought you knew that. Well, it's not going to do you any good in the sense that you're going out and win over some audience and that suddenly people are going to go, wait a minute. That time a few years ago that you started talking to me about that stuff, I thought you were kind of nuts. But then it suddenly struck me, you're the smartest person alive. Hey, guys, come over here and meet him. And they're going to suddenly grab you and put them, on your shoulders and carry you off. There is not only no natural audience for this, if there were, you can't win them over. Well, 3 minutes. Something else, though, about competition you might notice, that down in the city, and it's true inside the individual nervous system, you can look at all performances, you can look at all dances going on as a form of competition, not just in the ordinary psychological sense, in the psychobabble they do nowadays, but a love affair, a relationship with anybody is a form of competition. There is a factionalism involved. Now, I don't mean some imagined, it's true enough in the city right now, but I don't mean the kind of assumed sexual conflict arising from unconscious traumas that we've all suffered. There is simply a factionalism that can be between sexes, it can be between the same person, it can be the same family. As long as you are occupying two different spaces and you're both in a three-dimensional world, there is a tension. And without it, a family wouldn't involve, a relationship wouldn't involve, a love affair wouldn't survive. You wouldn't survive unless there was that kind of internal tension. So you can look at all dances, all performances, where they're assumed to be that to start with, as a form of competition. And there being a form of competition out there in the city world and in here with ordinary people, that being their city, there seems to be winners and losers in the competition. And what I was going to get you in the last minute or so, notice, under ordinary city conditions, winners are remembered for a short while. Losers are just forgotten. But trying to take yourself out of the city, to go into a revolutionary, to a new building site, there's not even the appearance, there's not even the reality of the participants, that is, a would-be revolutionist, there's not even the reality of them existing. And so any idea that there's going to be a winner or a loser in your attempt to establish a revolutionist camp inside of you, a new place, any idea of it being a win or a lose situation is beyond the laughing point. Because there's not even the appearance of there being participants. So how can you feel like, well, at least if I get through this and it begins to make more sense, whether you use these words or not, and your old city thinking begins to go, at least I will have gotten somewhere. I will have sort of won. This has been a real struggle, but I will have beat out ignorance. I will have beat out my old consciousness, my old dumb thoughts. There's no competition. Yeah, but that leads to other disturbing questions, and thank God the tape's about out, right? Being no natural competition, I could add this. There's a tale of a guy that one time was a would-be revolutionist that understood all this. And everywhere he would go, whether you want to consider in life or internally, but let's say it outside so it makes it easy, everywhere he would go and make appearances, since there was no native opposition to what he was doing, he had somebody that went along with him, like an assistant, that would stand in the back of the room and hold up this sign that the crowd can see, but it always says, "Remember how they hated you in Pittsburgh." Not just the back of the auditorium, the back of one's skull. Remember how they booed, how they hated you in Pittsburgh.